The first thing the general did upon returning to the capital was to demote me from wife to concubine. After he fell off a cliff, he lost his memory and was saved by a farm girl. The two of them performed wedding rites and had a pair of children. An ordinary farm girl, becoming the general's concubine was already a high status for her. But she wasn't just any farm girl, she was the long-lost legitimate daughter of the duke from many years ago. The general arrogantly said to me, "You are just an orphan who enjoyed a few years of wealth at the general's mansion. Leaving you as a concubine is already a favor. Don't be greedy and expect too much." Ding! RoyalStory reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. The general didn't look at me when he said this. He was very tall, and I had to look up to see his face clearly. The general's name was Zhao Moxian. He had very good looks. Though he was a military man, he wasn't rough but rather handsome and elegant. On our wedding night, he had just lifted my veil when he was hastily summoned away. He only left me the sight of him in his wedding attire, walking away. This was my first time really seeing the husband I had married 3 years ago so clearly. But my husband did not see me favorably. He frowned, his voice full of impatience. "Did you hear what I just said?" I withdrew my gaze and nodded slightly. "I understand." Zhao Moxian's expression softened a bit. "As long as you understand. The household affairs of the general's mansion have been managed by you for the past few years. And from now on, you will continue to manage them. When Sujin enters the mansion, she will be the only wife. Though you manage the house, you are ultimately just a concubine and must defer to her in all matters." Sujin was the farm girl Zhao Moxian brought back. 3 years ago, on the night of our wedding, he was ordered to go to battle and was ambushed by enemy troops along the way. Zhao Moxian was deceived and unfortunately fell off a cliff. Fortunately, he was saved by Sujin. At that time, he injured his head and lost his memory. Spending his days and nights with Sujin, they naturally developed feelings for each other. Like ordinary people, they got married and had children. Recently, Zhao Moxian regained his memory and remembered that he was not an ordinary man but a general from the Zhao family in the capital. So, he planned to take his wife and children back to the capital. On the way, they met an old servant from the duke's mansion, who found Sujin's face familiar and noticed a butterfly-shaped birthmark behind her ear. Immediately, the servant wept tears of joy and excitement, holding her hand. Only then did they know that Sujin's identity was not simple, she was the long-lost legitimate daughter of the duke. The two were deeply in love, and now their statuses were both incredibly respected, almost like a heavenly match. However, Zhao Moxian had already married in the capital. With Sujin's current status as the legitimate daughter of the duke, she could even become an empress if she entered the palace. How could she be a concubine? After much thought, he decided to demote me, an orphan with deceased parents, from wife to concubine. He seemed to feel it wasn't enough, and with a frown, warned me. "I promised Sujin that we would be together for a lifetime, just the two of us. Though you are now a concubine, I will not touch you. You should be grateful for Sujin's kindness in allowing you to stay as a concubine. Do not covet things you should not. If you behave, the general's mansion will keep you." Zhao Moxian left me behind after saying this and walked away quickly, not caring what I thought. And he really didn't care what I thought. In his eyes, I was just an orphan, with no choice but to depend on the general's mansion and live carefully under their roof. As he left, he dusted off his sleeves as if staying in the same place as me made him dirty. I quietly watched him leave. By my side, Xiaoro, who was serving me, was so angry that her face turned red. The general's actions are simply too much. In the entire capital, has any wife ever been so easily demoted to concubine without any fault? If the master were still here. Not long after I got married, our house caught fire for no reason, and my parents couldn't escape. The entire Wei family was burned to ashes. Everything was gone. Xiaoro. I lowered my eyes and gently interrupted her. Your young lady is not a pushover and won't suffer grievances for nothing. I found a silver lock wrapped in a handkerchief in my dowry box. The silver lock was unremarkable, something that could be bought anywhere, and not worth much. I handed the silver lock to Xiaoro. Take this silver lock to the manager of pawn shop. Soon we'll be able to leave here without giving them any advantage. Although Xiaoro didn't understand, she still nodded. Of course, I believe in you, young lady. Divorce was not easy. Though the general's mansion appeared grand, it was just an empty shell in reality. In these 3 years, if it weren't for my dowry supporting it from time to time, it would have long fallen apart. Zhao Moxian married me only because my mother was the only daughter of a wealthy merchant. He wanted to use my dowry to fill the general's mansion's deficits. In this dynasty, a woman's dowry could be taken back in a divorce, but not in a dismissal. That is why he was condescendingly leaving me as a concubine. Moreover, with the duke's mansion as his in-laws, it would be easy for him to confiscate my dowry. If I wanted a divorce, I had to find a stronger backing than the duke. The duke had taken Su Jin and her 2 children. Zhao Moxian didn't bother to come after me, which suited me perfectly. I carefully reviewed the accounts of the past 3 years. Seeing the large amount of extra money, I felt much more relieved. With backache, I got up from my chair and realized it was already dawn. After sleeping for a short while, I was awakened by a maid. Madam Consort, the general brought the lady, come quickly to receive them. Zhao Moxian hadn't officially announced my demotion from wife to concubine. But after returning to the mansion, he instructed that Su Jin should be respectfully called lady and that she was the true wife. A servant hesitated and asked him, "How should we address that?" Zhao Moxian just sneered disdainfully. From now on, she is just a concubine in the general's mansion. Isn't it obvious how to address her? I accepted it quickly, knowing it wouldn't last long. It's just that the maids in my courtyard had called me lady for 3 years, and found it hard to change all of a sudden. I tidied up briefly, and then walked out of the room. As soon as he saw me, Zhao Moxian frowned and scolded. Which family's concubine sleeps in so late? When Su Jin enters the household later, you must go to the main wife every day to observe rules. Su Jin gave him a coy glance. Moxian, don't be so harsh, you're talking as if I am the stern main wife of a strict household. Su Jin now looked completely different from the first time I saw her. Her head was adorned with pearls and jade, her face carefully made up with rouge and powder, and her clothes were of the finest quality. Standing there without saying a word, she indeed had the appearance of a noble lady from a prestigious family. She looked around the courtyard, nodded in satisfaction. Your courtyard is nice. You were previously Moxian's wife, so it was fine for you to live in the main courtyard. But when I join the household, you will no longer be able to stay there. I nodded obediently. Lady is right, this is my oversight, I will move out today. Seeing how understanding I was, she was very pleased. But then she stopped and scrutinized me again. Moxian and I vow to be together for life, but I heard you have no family, and you're all alone. I couldn't bear to let Moxian drive you out of the household, so I allowed you to stay as a concubine. She changed her tone sharply, her eyes staring at me sternly. Though you are a concubine, are you dressing so flamboyantly to seduce Moxian? When I heard seduce Zhao Moxian, I couldn't help but look down at my attire. After all, there wasn't much difference from usual, just a bit brighter. But Zhao Moxian agreed with her, giving me a look of extreme disdain. Su Jin, in my heart there's only you, other women are just ordinary. Zhao Moxian was full of deep affection, and Su Jin shyly smiled, looking very sweet. If I hadn't seen the fleeting amazement in Zhao Moxian's eyes, I would have actually believed how deep their love was. It truly made one feel as uneasy as if sitting on pins and needles. The wedding date between Zhao Moxian and Su Jin was set very soon. He handed over all matters of power to me to manage. Every day he was just full of affection with Su Jin. The betrothal gift list for Su Jin was long, over 80 items, comparable to that of a princess. This made Xiaoro angry for me. What a grand gesture from the general. He's marrying a new wife, and still expects you to pay for it? I winked at her. Who said I have to pay? Whoever marries the wife pays. But where is the money in the household? Xiaoro listened attentively, her eyes wide with excitement. Although there wasn't enough money in the household, the general's mansion was still a beautiful estate. I had Xiaoro take the betrothal gift list to make purchases, only mentioning the name of the general's mansion to credit the account, to be settled after the wedding. If they couldn't pay the debt 3 days after the wedding, they could use the general's mansion as collateral. Consider it a gift I left for Zhao Moxian. I didn't originally want to go so far, but days ago, Zhao Moxian and Su Jin called me over again, forcing me to watch as they displayed their affection closely, then knocked me down verbally. Dragging it out, as if doing me a favor, they told me, "On our wedding day, in front of all the guests, you must tell them you feel inferior to Su Jin and voluntarily demote yourself from wife to concubine." I smiled and agreed. Days ago, that lord replied, agreeing to help. And I, Wei Xiangning, have never been a pushover. The more pleased Zhao Moxian is now, the more he will regret it later. Zhao Moxian was extremely concerned about forming a matrimonial alliance with the duke's family. Everyone of significance in the entire capital was invited. Thinking they could pull silver from my pocket, the arrangements were nothing short of lavish. The spectacle was grand. Until the two exchanged vows and it was my turn to speak. Contrary to their expectations, I nearly glanced at the crowd. I, Wei Xiangning, married into the general's house 3 years ago with proper ceremony and have never made a single mistake in these 3 years. Yet Zhao Moxian now wants me as a concubine. Today, in front of all these witnesses, I am here to divorce him. Zhao Moxian was still all smiles, but upon hearing divorce, his expression changed drastically, turning gloomy. He glared coldly at me. "What nonsense are you talking about? Get down!" I faced him calmly and spoke slowly, emphasizing each word. "I, Wei Xiangning, want a divorce from you." With everyone staring at him, Zhao Moxian softened his tone. "Wei Xiangning, stop making trouble. The Wei family is long gone. In this world now, you have no relatives to turn to. Where will you go if you leave the general's house?" I looked serious, my words clear as I repeated loudly, "I said I want a divorce." Seeing my resolve, Zhao Moxian regained his harsh tone. "You are now merely a concubine of the general's house. What right do you have to ask for a divorce?" Just as he finished speaking, a clear voice came from outside the door. "Oh. How come I didn't know that the fiancé I have been looking for many years has become General Zhao's concubine?" The voice wasn't loud, but it made everyone hold their breath. The speaker was Xin Yi, the head eunuch holding great power in the Eastern Depot. My pillar of support, come to collect on a favor. Seeing it was Xin Yi, Zhao Moxian frowned tightly. "What is your meaning?" Although he had been away from the capital for 3 years, he had heard of Xin Ye's grip on power. The emperor greatly valued the Eastern Depot and was wary of noble families. Moreover, Xin Yi was known for his ruthless and cold nature. Opposing him would mean severe punishment, possibly death. Even the duke had to avoid confrontation with him. Xin Yi glanced coldly at Zhao Moxian. The duke quickly yielded the main seat, but Xin Yi just waved his hand. "I am here today to fetch my fiancé. As for whether General Zhao is marrying a wife or taking a concubine, that has nothing to do with me." Zhao Moxian, proud and arrogant, suppressed his anger seeing Xin Ye's disregard. "You mean to say that Wei Xiangning, who married into my house 3 years ago, is his fiancé?" He bowed, his gaze fixed on me, speaking through gritted teeth. I raised an eyebrow slightly, feeling relieved seeing Zhao Moxian's powerless anger in front of Xin Yi. He had no affection for me. Upon hearing that the wife he neglected had an affair, he felt humiliated. Even though Xin Yi was just a eunuch, Xin Ye's expression remained unchanged. "Yes. Your esteemed status surely wouldn't involve forcibly taking someone's wife." Xin Yi raised an eyebrow at this and replied playfully, "Oh? Someone's wife?" Zhao Moxian seemed to regain his confidence, standing tall. "Wei Xiangning married into the Zhao family 3 years ago. Everyone knows this." Xin Yi nodded. "I've heard of it." Then his tone shifted, "But the law of this land doesn't allow for demoting a wife to a concubine and marry a new wife. Is General Zhao disregarding the law?" His voice was calm and icy, but no one dared to make a sound. All eyes turned to Zhao Moxian. Zhao Moxian's expression changed slightly, giving me a warning glance. Wei Xiangning has been in the house for 3 years without bearing any children. Feeling unworthy of being the main wife, she reduced herself to a concubine. Today, we're admitting a new lady to officially announce this to everyone. He really thought he could manipulate me. Xin Yi turned his gaze to me. "Is that so?" Though I had no prior dealings with Xin Yi, his light words gave me considerable confidence. I stepped to Xinye's side, meeting his gaze. It's not as General Zhao says. Zhao Moxian's fists clenched, his gaze on me like sharp blades. I faced him without fear. 3 years ago, the general came to marry me. Yet on our wedding night, he left on an expedition. After returning to the capital, he never stayed in my courtyard. I remain a virgin. How could I bear a child alone? Zhao Moxian's face darkened, scolding me in a low voice, shameless. Ignoring him, I continued. When the general returned, the first thing he told me was that he only considered Su Jin his true wife, intending to spend his life solely with her. I asked the general, where did that leave me? I had always been submissive to Zhao Moxian. He never valued me. But now, I questioned him with dignity. He finally turned his eyes on me, scrutinizing me for a long time before frowning. Are you holding a grudge against me? This almost made me laugh. Did he think he was such a precious prize? I must thank Su Jin. Without Su Jin, if he had shared a bed with me, I'd be disgusted to the core. It's not that I resent the general. I don't want to destroy a loving relationship. Su Jin and her 2 children are wonderful. Wei Xiangning is willing to make way and requests a divorce. Zhao Moxian's face turned livid, wanting to say more. The duke moved to block him, looking at Xinyi standing behind me. Though Zhao Moxian was unwilling, he regained some clarity. He knew that today, Xinyi was here to support me. Previously, there had been no word of any interaction between the Wei family and this man of power. If he continued to obstruct, things would become unmanageable. Zhao Moxian reluctantly wrote the divorce letter. When I pressed my fingerprint on it, he couldn't help but taunt me, "Don't you regret it later?" I gave him a faint smile, "It's for your own good." Wei Xiangning won't regret it. With Xinyi around, the divorce matter was quickly resolved. Zhao Moxian's face turned ashen as he watched me move my dowry boxes out of the general's residence. Out of kindness, I explained to him. The general is newlywed, and old things from former people might hinder the new lady. It's only natural that I take all my belongings away. For the past 3 years, everything in the residence was personally arranged by me. Since I was leaving, I made sure to take all of my items with me. Even the ginkgo tree in the courtyard was uprooted. The Grand General's residence quickly became much emptier. Zhao Moxian couldn't take it anymore. Enough. Wei Xiangning, don't go too far. I shook my head and took out the ledger. It's not enough. Besides my dowry, the general still owes me 30,000 taels. Zhao Moxian's expression darkened. Pure fabrication. Since we're divorcing, stop with the unreasonable arguments. It's disgraceful. I placed the ledger in front of him. 3 years ago, when I entered the residence, the general's residence was already in debt. I paid for social engagements and the monthly wages of the servants with my dowry. The general should take a closer look. Zhao Moxian grabbed the ledger, and the more he read, the worse his face looked. Finally, he slammed it shut. How does the general plan to repay it? He spoke with difficulty, gritted his teeth. I will repay it. From the household expenses. I shook my head at him. There are no funds in the household expenses. Zhao Moxian glared at me. You did this on purpose. Intent on humiliating him. I was surprised. How could I? Although we aren't destined to be husband and wife, we still have feelings for each other. His expression softened slightly. What do you intend to do? I smiled even more gently. Naturally, I've thought it through for you. The bricks and tiles of the general's residence are all of top quality. They can be exchanged for some money. The general's residence was grandly built, with bluestone bricks and glazed tiles that, though aged, could still fetch some money. At least in large quantities. Considering Zhao Moxian was getting married today, I specifically instructed the servants to leave the bricks and tiles of the new room. I couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Women always have softer hearts. Despite Zhao Moxian treating me this way, I still helped him consider. I turned and instructed people to take the stone lions at the gate as well. As I left, Xinyi and I shared a carriage. I wasn't familiar with him, nor had we interacted before. The fact that he came to help me was because I leveraged a favor. Before my marriage, my father gave me a silver lock. He only told me that someone owed him a favor. In case of any trouble, I should take the silver lock to the manager of pawn shop. Someone would support me. I never expected that person to be Shinyi. Of course, I didn't place all my hope on him. I had already prepared the accounts and bought land and a house in South City. Even if Zhao Moxian didn't let me leave, within half a month, I would take all my dowry and fake my death to escape. With him around, I could make Zhao Moxian even more embarrassed. I had just stepped out of the general's residence gates. In anger, Zhao Moxian ordered someone to throw water behind me to dispel bad luck. What puzzled me was, why did Shinyi claim that I was his fiancé? Sharing a carriage with him, I didn't dare to speak or look more, only keeping my head down and staring at my dress hem. Afraid of me? He chuckled. I looked up and met a pair of indifferent eyes. Though he was smiling, the smile didn't reach his eyes. Shinyi was quite good-looking. Gorgeous yet not effeminate, his brows full of heroic spirit, you couldn't tell at all that he was originally a eunuch. I answered honestly, a bit. Liar. He lowered his eyes, his long eyelashes covering his emotions. I didn't reply, my fingers unconsciously twisting my dress hem. The carriage was very spacious, and the driver was skilled, making the ride steady. Not a drop of tea spilled on the small table. Shinyi placed one of the cups in front of me. If you were really afraid, you wouldn't be thinking of using me. His sharp gaze startled me, making me break out in a cold sweat. When I saw Shinyi, I had already made plans. I had heard that before entering the palace, Shinyi was a beggar. I ordered the bricks and tiles removed from the general's residence to be sent to a charitable orphanage outside the capital and donated 10,000 taels to build a school. This was to show goodwill to Shinyi. Miss Wei, am I right? Though phrased as a question, it was said with certainty. I knew these little tricks couldn't deceive him, so I could only nod in agreement. I have no other intentions, just asking you for help to find the murderers of my Wei family, at any cost. 3 years ago, a fire in the night burned my father, mother, and brothers to ashes, leaving no trace. Under the emperor's rule, an official family's extermination by a fire was too shocking. To anyone, it couldn't be an accident. For the Supreme Court to find nothing, the culprits behind it must be significant figures. As a housewife, my abilities were limited. Getting no results, having no way to avenge. Shinye's appearance gave me hope. No matter the cost, I must have justice. Everyone says, I am cruel and bloodthirsty. Are you sure you want to make a deal with me? Rumors had it that an official, to curry favor with Shinyi, sent a beautiful woman to his bed. The next day, the woman was skinned and made into a human lantern. I didn't know the truth, but I had seen the lanterns hanging at his residence gate. People who entered the Eastern Depot rarely came out whole. Shinyi was certainly not a good person. In such a ruthless place as the palace, anyone who rose to the position of emissary couldn't be purely good. I looked at him determinedly. You have agreed, right? You're not too foolish, then. He told everyone I was his fiancé, thus bringing me to his side. The uproar at the general's mansion thoroughly embarrassed Zhao Moxian. What was supposed to be a grand union of two families ended up in a farce, with half the mansion's property taken away, making a laughingstock of them. Su Jin was once a farm girl. After moving to the capital, the Duke and Duchess only sought to compensate for her past hardships. They bought clothes and headpieces for her, without teaching her how to manage the household. She covered her head with the bridal veil and was full of joy, thinking she had married her beloved and could live a wealthy life. Who knew that the interior of the Grand General's mansion was in deficit, with even the tiles and bricks being stripped away? Su Jin, at a loss, could only tug Zhao Moxian's sleeve and ask what to do. What could be done? A loss needs to be made up for. Zhao Moxian naturally didn't have the money. If he did, he wouldn't have schemed for my dowry. He could only gently hug Su Jin, coaxing her to use the dowry to cover the deficit first. Zhao Moxian always acted high and mighty with me, but he sure had a way with women. Su Jin, you know that Wei Xiangning, the venomous woman, has been managing the household for years and must have embezzled money. Moreover, she has Shinyi behind her as a supporter, so we can't do anything to her. For now, we can only rely on you, my dear wife, to cover the deficit. Once I earn military merits, I'll repay you 1,000-fold and even get you a noble title. Sujin was obviously taken in by his words and immediately brought out the money. The two shared a moment of deep affection. But within a couple of days of peace, the store manager who handled the purchase of bride price brought the IOU to the door. Zhao Moxian had always thought he had calculated against me by picking the most expensive items on the bride price list. He never imagined that the debt still had to be paid by himself. He naturally didn't acknowledge the IOU and drove everyone out. Ordinary merchants would usually back down at this point. I had foreseen this, so I chose stores that belonged to the dowries of aristocratic ladies. The store managers had backing, so they weren't afraid of Zhao Moxian. A formal complaint soon brought Zhao Moxian before the authorities. He looked at the IOU stamped with the general's mansion seal but still stubbornly denied it, claiming the IOU wasn't signed by him, so he wouldn't pay. You could throw a stone randomly in the capital and hit a third-rank official. All officials who could serve in the capital were slick and observant. Zhao Moxian himself wasn't very important, but he had married the duke's legitimate daughter, and the duke stood behind him. They couldn't offend him. I had divorced him, but in usual cases, he would just blame it all on me. But I also had support in Xinyi, who was second only to the emperor, so they couldn't offend me either. But they still summoned me, just to probe Xinye's stance. Everyone knew Xinyi was a eunuch, so how much affection could he have for a woman? Seeing me, Zhao Moxian's eyes were filled with palpable disgust. He couldn't maintain his demeanor any longer and started berating me. Wei Xiangning. You deliberately incurred debts to frame me. You are truly vicious. Faced with Zhao Moxian's rage, I only found it amusing. I respectfully greeted the chief official. Your Honor, please see clearly. I did not deliberately incur debts as the general claims. The general had to buy the bride price for his new wife because there was no money in the household accounts. It was an act of necessity. Zhao Moxian sneered coldly, I never wanted to be further entangled with you. In the 3 years I was away from the capital, you managed the household. And whether the accounts were in surplus or deficit was all based on your word. Fine. But your greed knows no bounds. You even incurred debts in the name of the general's mansion. I pretended to be frightened, that is indeed my mistake. Had I known the general intended to use my dowry to buy the bride price, I would not have helped to incur the debt. He wanted to accuse me of manipulating the accounts, but I wasn't giving him the chance. Sure enough, Zhao Moxian was furious and couldn't speak. He indeed had that intention. But he hadn't meant for it to be aired out publicly, as it would leave him with no face. After a long struggle, he finally squeezed out, cunning words and slick talk. The account books were still at the general's mansion, and he had already prepared a pit for me to jump into. If I suggested checking the books, it would align with his plan. The chief official wouldn't offend Xinyi, but neither would he offend the duke. But if Zhao Moxian presented doctored account books, the chief official would still accept them. The chief official fittingly coughed and said to me, Madam Wei, were those IOUs made when you were still the lady of the general's mansion, yes or no? I nodded, yes. Then do you admit to the debt? I widened my eyes, so, Your Honor also believes that a wife should spend her dowry to buy bride price for her husband's new marriage? He was emboldened by Xinye's absence to side against me. I did not mean that. According to our laws, the person who incurs the debt is liable for repayment. Since you acknowledge incurring the debt, you should repay it. Do you have any objections? He appeared just but was inclined toward Zhao Moxian. I have objections. I had anticipated this outcome when I incurred the debt and naturally had a way to handle it. I earnestly looked at the chief official. May I ask, Your Honor, if the debt was incurred by me, when I repay it, will the items thus procured be returned to me? Zhao Moxian couldn't sit still when he heard this. Wei Xiangning. I once thought you were merely short-sighted, but I never imagined you were so petty. The chief official was stunned, then replied after a moment. That's how it should be, but you were once part of the general's mansion, so... Xinyi interrupted, so what? I had already sent someone to find Xinyi before coming. As his fiancé, it was only right for him to support me. Xinyi smiled faintly but coldly at the chief official. I'm not aware of any law in our country that requires a wife to pay out of her own pocket for her husband to remarry. His smile was icy, making the chief official sweat profusely. No, no, I am just joking. Is General Zhao also here? Xinyi said as if he just noticed Zhao Moxian. I thought it was Xiangning who incurred debts for a bride price. Xinye's sarcasm was unmatched. His words changed the expressions of all three people present. I was affected by the term Xiangning, feeling indescribable emotions. The chief official was anxious due to Xinye's blatant partiality. As for Zhao Moxian, he was humiliated. Xinye's arrival made it clear to the chief official and onlookers that he cared deeply for his fiancée. So Zhao Moxian had to bear the debt. News travels fast in the capital. As soon as I returned to Xinye's mansion, countless invitations had already been delivered to me. Xinyi picked one out from the pile, a lotus viewing banquet, quite interesting. It was an invitation from the wife of the minister Wang. Admiring lotuses, boating on the lake, and eating lotus seeds, it's indeed an elegant affair. On the day of the banquet, Xinyi personally escorted me to the gate of the minister's mansion. As I got out of the carriage, he kindly reminded me to enjoy myself. By coincidence, I bumped into Su Jin. She was still dressed flamboyantly, but her face looked much more haggard. Zhao Moxian had no spare money, so he had to ask Su Jin to return the betrothal gift. When the duke learned of this, he immediately disagreed and insisted that Zhao Moxian find another way. But he couldn't think of any way, so Su Jin was swayed by Zhao Moxian's sweet words. The more he tried to stop her, the more she believed their love was unwavering. At this moment, the look in her eyes was venomous, as if she wanted to tear me apart. You shameless wretch, unwilling to be a general's concubine. I thought you found a better match, but he's just a eunuch, not even a real man. I slowly walked up to her and slapped her face. The crisp sound of the slap caught the attention of the people around us. Facing Su Jin's astonished gaze, I spoke coldly. Since I've chosen him, he is the best in my eyes. If Miss Su Jin thinks highly of the general and is willing to contribute your dowry, to me, no number of generals can compare to him. The passers-by, unaware of the details, changed their view of Su Jin when they heard about the dowry. Dowry money belongs to a woman, only an incapable husband covets it. I had no grudge against Su Jin, but she insisted on disgust me. I wouldn't tolerate it either. Although Xinyi was not an ordinary man, whenever I needed him, he stood firmly behind me, supporting me. Far better than any ordinary man. Zhao Moxian, who only knew how to manipulate his wife, had no right to compare to him. I didn't care why Xinyi helped me or his intentions. A gentleman judges deeds, not thoughts. What he did was enough. All the ladies at the banquet heard about the scene between Su Jin and me at the gate. Their scrutinizing gazes frequently fell on us. Su Jin glared at me with hatred, like a snake waiting in the shadows to strike. She didn't have to wait long, the opportunity came quickly. In the minister's mansion, there was a lotus pond. Lady Wang invited the guests to boat on the lake to pick lotuses. As soon as I stepped onto the boat, I felt a strong push from behind. Stumbling, about to fall, I grabbed the hand and pulled Su Jin into the lake with me. Although I could swim, I still choked on several mouthfuls of water. The lake water wasn't cold, but my wet clothes clung to me, unsuitable for appearing before others. I had no choice but to follow a maid to a private room to change and bathe. Just as I closed the door, someone grabbed my neck from behind. Don't make a sound. The voice was low, but I recognized it as Zhao Moxian's. He had a faint smell of blood, apparently injured. He didn't know it was me he was holding. Otherwise, he would have killed me already. I nodded obediently, without making a sound. My life was in his hands, a little more pressure and I'd be dead. When the maid heard the commotion and came to check, I helped cover it up. Nothing, I just lost my balance. Zhao Moxian then saw my face and his eyes turned cold. Why is it you? Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at him longingly and sorrowfully. Though he still frowned, his grip loosened slightly. Ignoring his threats, I spoke with concern. General, are you injured? Is it serious? Then I lowered my gaze, suppressing my disappointment. Though we're divorced, I still hope for your good health. Just pretend I was never here. Hearing this, Zhao Moxian was momentarily stunned. His tone remained cold, but the initial killing intent was gone. I struggled to keep from crying. I understand. Tears streamed down my face. Zhao Moxian raised his hand, actually wanting to wipe away my tears. Taking advantage of his distraction, I kicked him hard in the groin. I watched him passively as he writhed on the ground in pain. Well, I thought you still had feelings for him. Xinyi emerged from behind the screen, looking amused but paused when he saw me. Only then did I realize that my movements had caused my outer clothing to fall off. The wet clothes clinging to my body were nearly transparent, my skin faintly visible. Unfazed, he covered me with the fallen garment. We've got what we came for, let's go. Attending the banquet was just a pretext for obtaining the ledger. I was pondering how to sneak out when Su Jin approached, providing the perfect opportunity. Unfortunately, I didn't get the chance because Xinyi came in himself. Moreover, we encountered Zhao Moxian, and his injuries were likely Xinye's doing. As we left, I glanced back at the fainted Zhao Moxian and gave him another kick. Xinyi watched with interest, then drew a dagger from his sleeve. Need another stab? I shook my head. Shedding blood would only bring more trouble. It wasn't out of fear. Xinyi had snuck in too. Now that we had the ledger, there was no need to alert anyone. He placed the dagger in my hand. If you want to, don't worry about trouble, I'm here. Zhao Moxian lay on the ground, like a dying dog. When I was still in the boudoir, I harbored fantasies about my future husband. Admiring his youthful charm, I secretly inquired about him. I heard he was a young general, high-spirited and elegant, riding a horse leaning on a slanting bridge, with many beauties waving at him from upstairs. On the hurried meeting of our wedding night, seeing Zhao Moxian's handsome appearance, a small ripple was cast in my heart, which couldn't dissipate for a long time. After learning the news that his body remains were missing, I felt regret and grief for this husband I had only met once. If he were truly dead or could never remember his past life, I might still hold some feelings. But he came back. Treating me with such an attitude, he completely shattered that barely visible flutter in my heart. Seeing his deep affection with Su Jin, I didn't feel sad, only found it laughable. That I had even momentarily lost myself because of him, holding on to a fantasy. After the divorce, I moved to live in Xinye's mansion, though not in the same place as him. He was busy with his official duties, and I had my own things to do. The academy at the charity institution was built using bricks and tiles from the general's mansion. Though I had the intention to please Xinyi, I genuinely wanted ordinary people to afford books. The academy was built large and spacious, but the book collection was pitifully lacking. The noble families, led by the duke, monopolized famous books and ancient texts, and most officials came from noble families. My father was not born into a noble family and suffered many difficulties in his studies and pursuit of knowledge. He never believed that women should be ignorant, only told me that reading could enlighten the mind. I studied alongside my brothers at home. During my childhood, I didn't love reading, only found the lessons obscure and difficult and the teacher's ruler beatings painfully stinging. I would think of ways to slack off every day. Father would look on helplessly. Since I was a girl, he couldn't beat me or be fierce with me. Suddenly I remembered father feigning anger with his whiskers raised, but quietly comforting me as I wept sadly. My brother would laugh at me for crying, only to be yanked by his ears by mother until he shouted in pain. That wound in my heart suddenly broke open, emotion surged over me, leaving me both sore and in pain, making it hard to breathe. With blurred vision, a figure covered me, sighing softly. Why are you crying for no reason again? Xinyi held a handkerchief, wiping away my tears, his expression serious. His beautiful eyebrows and eyes glowed warmly under the candlelight. Seeing him, I felt aggrieved again for some reason. I miss my parents and brother. He patted my back lightly. Soon, very soon we can avenge them. The ledger Xinyi brought back was the reason for the Wei family's extermination. My father held an important position in the Ministry of Revenue and discovered the ministry's deficit. Refusing to be co-opted by the noble families, he dedicated himself to supporting poor scholars, which cost his entire family their lives. Xinyi was also someone my father had helped. In his youth, his family had some assets, but they were oppressed by the noble families, losing both money and lives. Only he, a teenager, and his elderly grandmother survived, struggling to get by. When my father met him, he was kneeling in front of a bookstore, begging the manager to let him copy books to earn money for his grandmother's medication. Moved by his talent, my father hired a doctor for his grandmother and gave him money to continue his studies. Just as things were looking up, his grandmother was tragically killed under the hooves of a noble's horse on a long street. Xinyi attempted to seek justice but was beaten to the brink of death. He used all his money to buy a silver lock, gifting it to my father, then entered the palace. Starting as a young eunuch, he climbed step by step, enduring more than 10 years of hardships to reach his current position. Xinyi stroked my hair gently, over and over. His movements were soft, his tone light. The academy lacks books. Shall I help you ask the noble families for some? His tone was like coaxing a child, making me forget he was a ruthless executioner. How should it be done? Xinyi played with my hair, casually saying. My dear Xiangning was pushed into the water by the people of the Duke's mansion, fell seriously ill, and was frightened. We should ask them for some compensation. The words seemed tender and intimate as he said them. I did not believe my looks could captivate Xinyi. I always had a doubt in my heart. Why did he say he was my fiancé? I couldn't understand. It did him no good. I asked him the reason. Xinyi chuckled, his cool fingertips brushing over my earlobe, sending a surge of heat. Does Xiangning think it's my excuse? Why can't it be true? Xinye's words echoed in my ears. I couldn't sleep all night because of it. Until the sun was high, I groggily fell asleep. When I woke again, it was already late. Heavy rain was pouring outside, and thunder roared continuously. Xinyi left in the morning and hadn't returned. He said yesterday that he was going to seek compensation for me. I believed him, but my eyelids kept twitching, and my heart wouldn't rest easy for some reason. The candle had been trimmed several times, and the heavy rain outside was accompanied by strong winds battering the window frame. I stood under the porch, waiting, until a tall figure appeared in the rain. He tilted the umbrella towards me, reaching out to touch my face. Waiting for me? He had probably just bathed. There was still a faint scent of soap on him. You weren't coming back. I was getting worried. He raised an eyebrow slightly and said lethargically, I ran into some trouble on the way back, so I was delayed. Were you hurt? I asked, watching him anxiously, perhaps because my mind was entirely on Xinyi. I didn't notice a bead under my foot and stumbled, almost falling to the ground. Fortunately, Xinyi reacted quickly, catching me into his arms. The scent of soap enveloped me, my face buried in his chest. Through the thin fabric, I could even hear his strong heartbeat. I hurried to get out of his arms, but I heard him grunt. What's wrong? Xinyi frowned slightly, touched a wound. Xiangning, don't move, it hurts. Hearing this, I dared not move again, afraid to touch his wound. Is it serious? Have you applied medicine? He was probably being hunted by the Duke's men when he returned. The noble families monopolized scholars with their rare books, and when Xinyi demanded compensation with these books, it hit them where it hurt. This made them enraged. A low laugh came from above my head, making me a little anxious. Let me see, I'm worried. Let me hold you for a while, I'm a bit tired. He buried his head in my neck, the warm breath making me stiff, not daring to move. After that night, my relationship with Xinyi became awkward. I didn't know how to interact with him. Those beautiful, bewitching eyes seemed to see through me completely, making me want to escape. I put all my energy into the academy. With the books from the Duke's mansion, the students in the academy were overjoyed and praised me non-stop. Upon hearing that these books were sent by Xinyi, his reputation improved. I was happy to see this. If Xinye's reputation among the people remained bad, after eliminating the noble families, the next to be targeted would be him. Once the birds are gone, the bow is put away. When the cunning foxes are dead, the hounds are boiled. The top needs to appease the people's grievances, and the cruel and harsh Xinyi is the best scapegoat. Xinyi himself probably knew this outcome but never considered it seriously. However, I wanted him to survive. Seeing the students praising him eased my heart, but then I turned to see Zhao Moxian. Zhao Moxian no longer had that high and mighty look. His face was haggard, clearly because of the ledger issue which made the Duke angry at him. He looked at me with a complicated expression. Wei Xiangning, you are helping Xinyi build his reputation like this. Do you really intend to marry him? Seeing him, I felt disgusted and turned to leave. But he grabbed me. Shenyi is ruthless. Do you think he helps you without any purpose? He is just a eunuch, not an ordinary man. Don't delude yourself into thinking he would have feelings for you. I fiercely shook off his hand and slapped him across the face. What does it have to do with you? Zhao Moxian, however, didn't get angry, his eyes filled with shock, yet he still wouldn't give up. I'm doing this for your good. I don't want you to be used. This man was hypocritical and disgusting. He used to look down on me, plotted against me in every way, and now pretended to remind me out of kindness. I looked at him coldly, just like how he used to look at me. General Zhao, we divorced long ago. By what right do you care about me? Zhao Moxian's eyes showed a slight change. It was my fault before. I hurt your heart. In the future. I interrupted him. What future? Are you willing to abandon the Duke's prestigious son-in-law role? Or do you plan to magnanimously take me as a concubine again? He opened his mouth but couldn't say a word. Zhao Moxian, I said seriously. I don't care about Shenye's motives. I don't care if he's a real man. He never let me suffer any grievances. I'm willing to marry him. Zhao Moxian's face darkened. He forced out a smile, struggling to speak. Don't say angry words. Shenyi is not a suitable match. You will regret it in the future if you marry him. Tisk, is General Zhao trying to steal my intended bride? Shenyi appeared out of nowhere, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. Shenyi lifted a strand of my hair, playing with it absent-mindedly. Xiangning marrying me will not regret it in the future. As for you, General Zhao. He paused, casting a contemptuous glance at him. Regret is useless now. Zhao Moxian's devastated look was laughable. He was always so high and mighty, looking down on me from his elevated position, as if I were something to be used and discarded at will. Now he had a deep affection expression, completely forgetting Su Jin, who had saved his life and bore him children. The fickleness of men was fully displayed in him. Shenyi helped me lift my bangs. What are you thinking? Only then did I realize that Shenyi was still holding me. The setting sun cast long shadows that intertwined as we leaned against each other. The rosy sunset glow made his features even more captivating. He lowered his eyes, looking at me intently, his long eyelashes, and my reflection in his light-colored pupils. Out of a strange impulse, I reached out to touch his eyes. He was slightly startled but didn't move, letting my hand cover his eyes. With mixed feelings, I spoke. Shenyi, why are you really doing this? I might really misunderstand. Shenyi chuckled lightly. What? Marrying me, is it true? He grasped my hand that covered his eyes. Xiangning, do you also have feelings for me? I didn't answer. He held my face with one hand, looking into my eyes seriously. I'm incomplete, Xiangning, do you mind? I shook my head. He smiled. Marry me, you are willing, aren't you? I lowered my eyes. But I can't help you with anything. Xiangning, never leave me, that's enough. He was very close, his voice carrying a seductive tone. His rosy lips brushed past my earlobe, causing a tingling sensation, warming my heart. Shenyi said, revenge will come soon. He did not keep me waiting long. After the autumn examination results were announced, many students from the academy made it to the rankings, yet the top 3 were still from noble families. While it was supposed to be a joyous occasion for all, one person hanged himself below the golden ranking list that night. He left behind a blood-written letter, crying about how he had studied hard for years but always failed, lamenting the injustice of the heavens and society. It was initially thought to be a moment of despair from failing the examination, leading to a foolish act. Until another student from his hometown, after being flogged, sounded the drum of complaints against the examination officials, accusing them of corruption and swapping examination papers. The emperor, enraged, ordered a thorough investigation. Shenyi seized the opportunity to present the ledger, cementing the crimes of the duke's faction, including trading official positions, corruption, and forming cliques for personal gain. With the downfall of the duke, the noble families lost their backbone and fell into disarray. Shenyi gave them no time to breathe, cutting through chaos decisively. That night, blood flowed endlessly on the long street. Shenyi spared the duke's life and took me to his prison cell. When the duke saw me, he laughed wildly. I never thought that I would fall into the hands of a eunuch and a little girl. Had I known, I would have killed you directly. His eyes were fierce and malicious. I never took you seriously back then, but who would have thought the hunter would be pecked by the sparrow? I held the dagger that Xinyi had once given me, looking at him expressionlessly. In the eyes of your noble families, we are all ants. Have you ever thought that ephemeral beings could shake the tree? I stabbed the dagger fiercely into his body, blood splattering onto my face. My hand holding the dagger trembled slightly, and Xinyi held my hand. Xiangning, hold the knife steady, I'm here. I stabbed him numerous times, avoiding vital points. He couldn't die that easily. I tied up all the other members of the Duke's mansion, drugged them, and poured tung oil over them. Just like my parents and brother, they would feel the flames engulfing them while awake, seeing their loved ones beside them yet powerless. Su Jin was among them, trembling like a leaf, constantly kowtowing and crying for mercy. I was wrong. I was wrong. Please, don't kill me. I didn't harm your parents, you can't do this to me. She seemed to recall something. Zhao Moxian initially wanted your life, it was me who pleaded for you to be spared. You can't kill me. Xinyi held my hand, entwining his fingers with mine. He sneered, then you truly are merciful. I looked at her, my life was never in your hands. You didn't kill me only because I still had value to you. Then I lit the fire starter. Instantly, the flames roared, and the sounds of wails and curses filled the air, pulling out the roots by not leaving any threats behind. I had no reason to leave any hidden dangers for myself. As for Zhao Moxian, I had his limbs disabled. Living in fear, becoming the person he used to look down on the most, enough to make him wish he were dead. Not long after, he went mad. Crying and laughing, muttering all day long, I am the general. Wei Xiangning, you should be grateful to be my concubine. Xinyi is just a filthy eunuch, how dare you marry him? You will regret it. No. I regret it. If only I hadn't returned to the capital. Zhao Moxian didn't last much longer. He jumped off a cliff and died. With the noble families no longer a threat, Xinyi voluntarily resigned from his position, citing his old wounds as the reason to retire. Before leaving the palace, he asked the emperor to write an inscription for the academy. With the academy's reputation soaring, students from all over the country came in admiration. He would often wander there, occasionally answering students' questions. More often, he liked to lean on me, playing with my hair. Timidly, he would ask if I had any regrets. Until one day, I took out a bead. You really make a brilliant plan. It was the same bead that made me fall into his arms. Xinyi remained calm. I have long coveted Xiangning. Xinye's side story. Wei Xiangning was originally my fiancé. Back then, Mr. Wei had high regard for me. Seeing my talent in studies, he cherished me and treated me exceedingly well. Not only did he send me to the academy, but he also got a doctor to treat my grandmother. I was extremely grateful to him. He often told me that if his daughter were not too young, he would definitely marry her to me. He doted on his youngest daughter dearly. I knew that little girl, named Xiangning. At only 2 or 3 years old, she was like a little ball of sticky rice, white and adorable, smiling at everyone she met. Mr. Wei, who was usually stern and serious, would always beam with joy whenever he mentioned Xiangning. I didn't understand it at first. Until the little girl hugged my leg, showing her tiny rice-like teeth, and smiled sweetly at me, calling me brother. I thought, such a pampered girl should never suffer any grievances if I were to marry her in the future. Later, my grandmother died, and I had no place to seek justice, nearly losing my life. Lying on the ground, I felt that living was meaningless, but I was unwilling to give up. Why? Why were noble families so high above, able to easily take the lives of ordinary people? I wasn't satisfied. I wanted revenge. I wanted to uproot the noble families. But I had nothing besides a worthless life. To seek revenge, I needed to stand tall and wield power. Nowhere was closer to power than the imperial palace. So I entered the palace. Before entering the palace, I converted all my wealth into a silver lock and gave it to Mr. Wei. I will always remember his kindness. I don't know how long I will survive after entering the palace, nor if I will have the chance to repay his kindness. Or if I will see Xiangning grow up. But now that I have become a eunuch, I am no longer an ordinary man. I have no chance to marry her anymore. Sending a silver lock, I only wish for her to be safe and happy. I started as a small eunuch and endured many grievances. Step by step, I clawed my way up using any means necessary. I know I am on a path of no return and cannot involve Mr. Wei. After entering the palace, I pretended not to know him and had no contact with him in private. When I finally reached a high position, Xiangning got married. The Wei family was gone. A fire wiped everything out. I hated myself for being powerless. Knowing who the enemy is but being helpless. I planned and devised my schemes. I had great patience. Lying low, enduring, these were my specialties. I was like a patient beast, lurking in the dark, waiting for the right moment to deliver a fatal blow to my prey. Xiangning came looking for me with the silver lock. Her husband left for battle on their wedding day. He died not long after. She became a young widow. Pitiful, but also fortunate. After all, most men are unreliable. Her dead husband returned. He even cozied up to the Duke, intending to demote her from wife to concubine. What an idiot, he might as well have stayed dead. Xiangning wanted a divorce and sought me as her support. A bit clever, she knew how to calculate. She built an academy next to the charity institution. Of course, I agreed. That fool thought Xiangning was an orphan, so he tried to take advantage of her. Greedy and insatiable. I specifically chose his wedding day to come. Not only did I flaunt my power, I also told him that Xiangning was mine. I would protect her. I was her backing. Xiangning always thought our relationship was mutually beneficial. To her, the title of fiancé was just a pretext. So be it. As a eunuch, marrying is a burden for any girl. In a few years, after I die, I will find a good place for Xiangning. But in front of others, Xiangning said, in her heart, I surpassed any general. I felt reluctant to let her go. I didn't want her to leave. Beauty trap on Zhao Moxian. That fool, he really fell for it. Xiangning kicked him, I could feel the pain just watching. But Xiangning got wet, and that fool saw it too. I should have gouged out his eyes. Before leaving, Xiangning gave him a couple more kicks, feeling much better. Why not just kill him? Oh, Xiangning said it would be a hassle. All right, I'll take it as her concern for me. So, how can I make sure she stays by my side forever? Her soft heart and my self-injury plan worked. I held Xiangning. Her hair was so soft, like satin. She cared for me, and she was anxious. She must have feelings for me, right? Right? No matter what, I don't want to let her go anymore. Xiangning was smart, using the academy to build a reputation for me. I originally had no intention to live. This path was always a one-way street. But Xiangning wanted me to live, she had feelings for me, without a doubt. Why did that fool come again? Luckily, Xiangning was also annoyed by him. He shamelessly slandered me. Xiangning was so angry that she slapped him. See, I knew Xiangning had feelings for me. Xiangning would never regret marrying me. She wanted to kill, I passed her the knife, and if anything happened, I would bear it. I was her backing. The Duke's lost daughter shamelessly claimed to be Xiangning's savior. No wonder she and Zhao Moxian hit it off. They were both shameless. Luckily Xiangning was smart and wasn't deceived by her. To eliminate the root, who knows what trouble she might cause if she lived? Xiangning being too smart isn't always good, she saw through my plan. What now? I could only admit it. Yes, I had indeed desired her for a long time.